Assalamu alaikum. Good morning and welcome to the 7th Annual AMP Conference. It's after 9:30, so we do need to get started. And good job on being here this morning. I think we can probably seat 1,000 people in this room, but you're the 1%, the people that woke up this morning and said this is going to be a great session and I'm going to come and listen. My name is Dr. Manal Fakhoury. I'm from Florida, and it's my pleasure and privilege to moderate this session. I was happy when I was told that I would have these 4 superstars to introduce. And the way we'll do the session this morning is one by one, I will introduce the speakers right before they come up to speak. And the topic that we're speaking about today is how to embed the Palestinian cause within pop culture. So whether it's through music, art, food, books, blogs, sports, comedy, science, politics, there are many, many ways that we can do it, and it's time for us to do it. I believe finally we are approaching a tipping point more than ever because we are now globally connected where 15 years ago we couldn't come up here and say the same thing that I'm saying to you today. It is a responsibility that each of us carries. And if you think about one person doing as much as these 4 individuals has done, imagine the multiplying effect of how much work we can get. And there are a lot of people that are listening now. So this is a time in history where we have the most opportunity. We also have seen the most amount of pain. So with that, I would like to start with our first speaker. And let me turn to the introduction. So each of you will share your ideas with us. We're giving the speakers 10 minutes. And let me start by introducing someone who I really admire and I've gotten to know just briefly over the last few years, and that is Laila El-Haddad. Laila is a Palestinian author and activist. She is a key voice for understanding the situation in Gaza through her award-winning blog and her books, Gaza Mom and the Gaza Kitchen, A Palestinian Culinary Journey. And her work as a journalist, documentarian, media activist, public speaker, and policy advisor, she provides more insight into the human experience of the region, originally from Gaza, and presently she lives in Maryland with her husband and their 3 children who are in the room. Please help me welcome Laila El-Haddad.
Thank you, Manal, for that lovely introduction, and thank you all for coming. Somehow I always get stuck with the 9:30 a.m. sessions. Most people are still asleep, so. Yeah, I don't know about the title, the pop culture, but I understand. For me, I would maybe say it's, how to mainstream Palestine in a way, how to bring it into the mainstream debate and reach audiences that it doesn't usually reach. And that's something that's kind of been on my mind for a long time, ever since I started my work as a journalist in Gaza in 2003. And I always thought, like many young Palestinians, well, we just have to get the message out there, and it has to be strictly political, and we have to, if we scream loud enough, maybe somebody will hear us, kind of thing. And so that's sort of what I did in my work, at least, in my reporting for Al Jazeera at the time. And it just happened that I had my first son, who's now 10, but a very young child with me. I was pregnant with him, and then he was about 9 months old, and we kept getting stopped, as is a very common occurrence with Palestinians, on the border crossings on our way to Gaza. And the way I would get to Gaza, of course, is fly into Cairo, and then I would have to go 5 hours by land and then wait by the Rafah crossing and see whether it was open or not. And if it was, we got in, and if it wasn't, well, too bad, we just had to wait. And sometime, I think in the fall of 2004, I started to keep sort of an online diary entry, a blog about this experience. And it was mainly so that my husband, could be informed about what was going on. This is before, of course, Facebook and Twitter. And I wanted to keep the politics strictly separate from the personal. I thought there's no place for writing about the problems I'm facing as a young Palestinian mother, in my diary entries or in my work. And, the blog basically morphed as I was waiting this one particular time where I was waiting for about 55 days for the border to open in Egypt. The blog morphed from the story of, into rather, the story of how the personal is violated and immersed with and often overtaken by the political for Palestinians. And it wasn't until this one Egyptian friend of mine who was very close to me said something to me like, well, you must be used to this by now. It's no big deal, right? And then I thought, well, how could she, this person I grew up with, not get it? How could she not understand what it was like to wait for weeks and months at a time and then, grapple with the uncertainty and sort of the volatility and indefinite nature? It's maddening, especially for someone who needs to get somewhere and nobody really cares. And so after that, I realized, the personal is political for Palestinians, and we need to be telling these really mundane, boring details. That's really what makes the story and helps people understand us as human beings suffering a very human struggle that isn't very different than what anybody else is struggling. And so as I was waiting that particular time, I wondered how then could I convey this experience to people, help them to understand this and so many other sort of quintessential Palestinian experiences, to understand dispossession, to understand statelessness, to understand what it means to be occupied, whether you were in Palestine or outside of it, to see Palestinians as human beings rather than as abstractions. How could I convey and help people understand this? And most importantly, how could I convey that it was these very ordinary moments, the ones that seem so routine and so quiet, in the words of Sari Makhdisi, that they constituted the backdrop of daily Palestinian existence. Being stranded by the border for days and sometimes weeks at a time, attempting to obtain a travel permit. All of these things are, of course, very familiar to probably most people in the audience if you've ever had to deal with that, going to Palestine. And then most importantly, family unification with my husband, who is a Palestinian refugee with refugee status that wasn't allowed to come with me to visit, to live in his native land. And so I'm going to quote Rashid al-Khalidi, who says the quintessential Palestinian experience takes place in airports, borders, checkpoints, any one of these modern barriers where identities are checked and verified. And so that became sort of my mission, or the bulk of my activism, is being able to narrate this Palestinian experience. My particular experience, but in so doing, sharing and narrating the Palestinian story at large. And when I was living in Gaza, it was, blogging, and then eventually that particular blog, Raising Yusuf, I turned into a book called Gaza Mom, Palestine Parenting, Palestine Politics, Parenting, and Everything in Between, excuse me. And it was a chronological, compilation of my blog entries at the time and my writings from 2003 through 2007, when I was working and reporting in Gaza, living through the disengagement of Palestinian elections, the beginning of the blockade, and then when I came back to live with my husband in the United States through 2010, and the hermetic closure of Gaza, what that was like, being on the inside and then on the outside, living Palestine inside out, if you will. And so again, I began to write about all this in my blog that turned into a book. And then I kept thinking of ways of how to reach, audiences that weren't as informed, to narrate and tell this Palestinian story. And later then, the idea had come to me along with a co-author who approached me to use food, and it was something I was always interested in, but use food to narrate the Palestinian story. And it wasn't something that people immediately understood, but the idea was to tell the Palestinian story, to tell the story that we keep hearing, sort of the theme of the conference, of the constant steadfastness of the Palestinian people and the struggle of Palestinians to stay human, particularly under very inhuman circumstances like the ones we're seeing in Gaza. That was what I wanted to do, is how to tell that story. And the idea of writing a cookbook, what we call a documentary cookbook, that weaves together food and politics and profiles of individuals, along with political and economic analysis, along with the very traditional recipes prior to 1948 and after. Using that as a way to tell the Palestinian story created a kind of cognitive dissonance in the minds of a lot of people, like especially in our own communities, like, you want to write a cookbook? إيش يعني كتاب طبخ? I don't get it, It's like, politics, we have to. And so people didn't immediately get it here. When we went to Gaza to interview people and do our field work, it's like, I give the example of one of the first times we were there, my co-author and I, and we went into this clinic where we were waiting to meet someone, and then we were discussing how to obtain this really obscure recipe for lentils. In Gaza بيسموه قرع or bamia وفول. I'm sorry, bamia وعدس, right? So okra and lentils. Probably many people have never heard of this. And as we're discussing it, this pediatrician pops his head out of his clinic and he says, did you say bamia وعدس? That's my favorite dish. Let me tell you about it. And let me tell you about Ottoman land laws in northern Jabalia in 1920s. And let me tell you about this, that, and the other. Turns out most people are, more than eager and willing, and in fact ecstatic to be able to share their personal stories. So where many Palestinians on the outside didn't immediately understand this as a strategic tactic or whatever, Palestinians in Gaza immediately understood that it's about much more than just food. And where Gaza is besieged militarily and economically and so on, it is also besieged by media. And so everybody is so used to having a microphone shoved in their face and being asked, what is your position on Hamas? What is your position on Fatah? What is your... nobody is asked to share their stories. And in so doing, in having these conversations in this very personal, intimate space of the kitchen, where histories are perpetuated and so forth, all of that other information which exists on a daily basis as a backdrop to life comes out. And you begin to have these much more comprehensive and humane conversations that people can resonate with. And again, going back to the theme of being able to share and talk about and narrate the Palestinian story. And so that's what we did. We just talked to farmers and agronomists and women and people from all walks of life, farmers and fishermen and so forth. Palestinians who remember the Nakba and what that was like, how food habits changed prior to 1948 to the present, how the blockade going on 10 years impacts people's access to foods and ingredients, and how that has changed in terms of their access to these ingredients, which might exist in the market but which they no longer can actually purchase. So we discuss all of these things and we put them in the book, and we published it in late 2012, 2013. Not knowing really what people would make of it. It was very difficult to get to Gaza to do the field research as a two-woman team to do this. And in the same period that we published the book, or we gave birth to the book, we gave birth to 2 children between both of us. So it was very hard. And we didn't think anybody would understand. But we were really stunned when we saw how, in terms of speaking about the intended audiences that it was meant to reach. We were just happy to be able to do this. It was like, for me, a labor of love, something I've always been interested in, codifying this very traditional folk knowledge and recipes, talking to the people. Everybody knows the cuisine of Gaza is very distinct, but what that cuisine tells us about the history and the current period as well was just as important. So being able to do all this was, that I was satisfied. But then we were really stunned when we had celebrity chefs both here and abroad, like Anthony Bourdain and others, reach out to us about this book, and just were getting a lot of critical acclaim, being featured in Bon Appetit and Savoir magazine, and chefs as far as in the United Kingdom, Yotam Ottolenghi and Sami Tamimi, all of them giving it critical acclaim and awards, really had taken us aback. And that was very satisfying, and really, to me, was confirmation of, validating of what I originally suspected, is finding ways to be able to narrate the Palestinian story. And, I'll just close with saying that's what I encourage everyone to do. Find your voice, narrate your story is really important. I think we underestimate that, or we feel like, well, we can't, I can't write, or I can't do X, or who wants to hear my story, or who cares about. No, that's really what we need to be doing as Palestinians. We need to own the narrative. We need to issue a corrective to what's out there. And there isn't a lot out there when we're thinking on the grand scale of what's been written about our history and our individual stories. So whatever it is that you're passionate about, however it is you think you can do it, whether it's writing or cooking or photography, or there's so many different creative ways, do it. Own that narrative, tell your stories, and help tell the Palestinian story at large. Thank you so much.
Perfect. So excellent job, Laila. Thank you for your comments, and you did perfect. It was right at 10 minutes, so you had an internal clock. And be thinking about, if you have any questions, we're going to have time for questions at the end. And I also enjoyed your closing comments about something for each of us to be thinking about what we can do. Okay, our next speaker is someone that I originally met online, probably like many of you have, where there was a spoken word poetry being performed, and it was being shared, and it was beautiful, and many of us continue to share that video. Dr. Rafeef, who I want to call Rafeefa, but it is Dr. Rafiq Ziad, is a Palestinian performance poet and human rights activist. She is based in London. Her performance of poems such as We Teach Life, Sir, which is the whole theme for this conference this year, and Shades of Anger went viral within a few days of their release. Also, she was chosen to represent Palestine at the South Bank's, it's hard to read from here, Poet Olympiad in 2012. Dr. Ziad her debut album, Hadil, is dedicated to Palestinian youth who still fly kites in the face of F-16 bombers, who still remember the names of their villages in Palestine and still hear the sound of Hadil over Gaza. We heard her perform last night. Did an excellent job. Please help me welcome Dr. Rafiq Ziad.
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, and thank you for being here so early in the morning. You are the brave souls. I think everyone else is either sipping a bucket of coffee or still in bed. So thank you so much for being here. What I'm going to talk about today is a little bit of my journey through spoken word. They're just thoughts about what spoken word means to me and my own journey, but I think they can apply very much to various spheres when we're speaking about Palestine and how to mainstream Palestine. And I wanted to start with that because for me, the question was never, how do I mainstream spoken word or how do I embed what I do in pop culture? In many ways, that's irrelevant to me. What I'm interested in is how do we mainstream Palestine and our narrative with our language, with our history, and make that more popular and make people understand it, which is quite different than trying to get into the mainstream yourself as an individual. And I say that because the minute my video, We Teach Life, Sir, went viral, the first message I started to get from people who wanted me to go mainstream was to stop speaking about Palestine. They said, you have a certain talent, you can speak on stage, you speak English well. We are really in need of people like you to come to these spaces and perform. But when they said people like you, they generally meant it in the most Orientalist sense, that there aren't a lot of Arab or Muslim or people from the Middle East women in these spaces, and we would like you there. We don't necessarily like all the politics you bring, so why don't you park that to the side? And to me, part of doing the work I do is very much about embedding my own history and narrative into the work that I do. So there was no way I was going to stop talking about Palestine. And I say that because my story into spoken word is very much a Palestinian story. I didn't wake up one day and decide to start poetry. In many ways, poetry was a form of survival. Unfortunately, we Palestinians age ourselves by the number of wars we have been through. So I am a product of the 1982 invasion and siege of Beirut. And it was there that I learned about poetry. It was there through the strength of people hiding in bunkers, under bombardment, under siege, that we were learning the words of Mahmoud Darwish, and we were repeating them, and that was our mode of survival. It was there that we were drawing pictures of Hamdallah in the bunkers, and it was mostly women that taught me what Palestine is. It is the women in my family who taught me about poetry, who taught me about Hamdallah. By the way, how many people of the younger generation here don't know what Hamdallah is or who Hamdallah is? All right, very important. We have a beautiful Palestinian artist called Najil Ali, and he drew a little boy called Hamdallah. You'll see him in a lot of pictures, standing with his back to the world. Hamdallah represents the Palestinian child that was ethnically cleansed out of Palestine at the age of 10. And Najil Ali used to say, Hamdallah will remain 10 until we return, and his back will be turned to the world. So it was in bunkers, in shelters, that I learned who Hamdallah is, and I learned our story. So you cannot speak of Palestinian spoken word or Palestinian poetry without embedding it in the Palestinian narrative and without realizing all the people who came before me to get me to the stage that I'm at. Not just the famous poets that we know that sustain us through struggle, but also the amazing and brilliant and strong Palestinian women that have taught us generation through generation what it means to be Palestinians, what it means to stand up to Israeli occupation, colonialism, and apartheid every single day of our lives. And that's why when people say don't speak about Palestine, I tell them I can't, but there's no way to be able to do that, especially in my poetry. So the concept of going mainstream in that way was never something I wanted to do. I wanted our story to become mainstream. And to be honest, I didn't go seeking it out. The first time I ever performed on stage was because I was active on my university campus, and this young man actually assaulted me and said, "You deserve to be raped before you have terrorist children." Up to that point in time, I was actually very afraid of getting on stage. I had stage fright, and I also was afraid of my English. I didn't start learning English until much older in life, and my English wasn't so great, and I used to mistake words that no Arab should mistake, like tourist and terrorist. So I was always very worried about getting on stage and trying to speak and making mistakes. But in that moment, I was so angry that I really needed to say something. And that's when I wrote the poem that I performed last night, Shades of Anger. And ever since then, I've been trying to get on stage and perform. And the wonderful thing is that releasing that anger, there's two results to it. One is that you finally connect with people who have been feeling that way for such a long time and have had no one actually articulate it in public. And on the other hand, you do get a backlash. And I'll try to speak about both, what it means to connect with people and what it means to get that backlash and how to face it. So within the spoken word I do, there's 4 concepts that I try to keep with me as I do this work. To make sure that I embed what I'm doing in my craft and to make sure I'm as good at my craft as I can possibly be. And that is working with the language and working with the musicality of spoken word. Spoken word is a performance art. It is about getting on a stage. It's about connecting with an audience. So you have to do it in a way where you are respecting your audience and you are making sure the language you are using connects with your audience and there's musicality and performance to it. But more importantly, integrity. And what I mean by integrity is the integrity of the work and the representation of myself, meaning not just myself as an individual, but myself as a Palestinian that comes from a lineage of a strong Palestinian people, and making sure that I am respectful of that heritage that we come from and our history that we come from. Besides language and integrity, accountability is really important to me. That I am accountable to my audience and that I'm always accountable to my people. And I think sometimes when artists become famous or so-called famous or mainstream, they forget where they come from. And quite often people forget where they come from, and I think that's when their art becomes really horrible. So every now and then I make sure that I go back to Lebanon, to any refugee camp I can get to, just because I'm not actually allowed to get into Palestine. To make sure that I am always connected with my people and that I'm accountable to my own people. We're not doing this just as individuals or as stars. This is not about individual stardom. It's about being accountable to our own people. And finally, for me, it's also very, very critical to always be active, to be an activist within the Palestine movement, whether you're outside, whether you're in the diaspora. It's great and wonderful if you have a specific talent that you want to share, but this doesn't mean that you can't be active otherwise. And nowadays, we all have the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. I know that many of you are already active on your campuses or in other places as well. And I think that is part of what makes art strong. And what makes you able to connect to people and able to speak your message is if you're actually constantly struggling and with people, not sitting outside. If you see artists' trajectories when they stop being active, that's also when the art begins to be disconnected. And I'm just saying these things because I think they're important to what we mean by mainstreaming Palestine, because the integrity of our people, accountability to our people, constantly being active is really critical to producing good art and to reaching a more mainstream audience. Now, to speak about the backlash a little bit, I think we also have to be honest with ourselves and say the mainstream isn't exactly open to us. I was performing once in a high school in Canada, and I used one of the lines in my poem, like my grandfathers, I want to write a poem like my grandfather's smile when they stole his land. Now that's a fact. My grandfather's land was stolen. He couldn't stop going back to it, and he actually went back and worked it year after year after 48. And he would tell my father, and my father constantly told us this story, that he couldn't part with his land. He said his hands were calling out for it. He didn't care who owned it. He felt he had to cultivate it. And I think that tells you a lot about who really appreciates that land and who's really embedded in it and comes from there. But that line, I got a complaint. The complaint went to the Ontario Board of Education, and the Ontario Board of Education decided after that, and I hold this as a badge of honor, that they are going to vet every single performance that goes in any high school. Of course, what this has meant was that I haven't been able to perform since then in a high school, but also that anything to do with Palestine gets vetted. Usually that would have stopped us, but what we simply did was we created a group called Students Against Israeli Apartheid that was in high schools, made up of high schoolers. And we continued to perform anyway, and we continued our work anyway. When the South Bank Center, in my introduction, it was said that the South Bank Center chose me to represent Palestine in a poetry Olympiad. This was having one poet from each country around the world to represent the poetry of their country. Before it even went public that I was the one chosen to represent Palestine, I had known for about a week, but the news hadn't hit the media yet. And before we knew it, the Zionist media in London had already published an article saying an anti-apartheid, BDS activist, hateful, terror, every word you can use before my name has been chosen to represent Palestine. The way we reacted to that was, of course, they wanted us to make a huge deal, but the most beautiful part about it was, rather than having a big panic, the entire community was so supportive of the fact that I was chosen, and every single one of the times I was performing at this entire festival, the hall was completely full because of the community support I received. And this is another thing. I think if we're going to mainstream our art and mainstream Palestine, we need the community support in the entire journey. We cannot exist and we cannot survive if we do not support each other. And finally, and I think this is an important point to touch on as well, is how do we actually get the funding and the money to do the work that we do? Because art doesn't make itself, and it's actually quite expensive. And here, I want to emphasize this point because it's something that keeps coming up again and again and again for me. I applied for grants from the Ontario Arts Council, and I was very lucky to actually get the grant because they saw the number of audiences. Very importantly to me, the grant had no strings attached. There was no certain political message that I had to give that had to do with the granting body. There was no strings attached to what I had to say. I had the absolute freedom to speak my mind and speak what I had to say. However, there are quite often granting agencies that will not grant you unless they decide your politics and they decide what you're going to say. Even worse, there are many times granting bodies and funding bodies that will only give you grants if you do the work with somebody who's funding somebody who's also an Israeli, asking you to work with somebody who's an Israeli, to speak about peace and normalization and how you can all get along if you would just want peace. You know, the normalization rhetoric that we get over and over. And I always put it first and foremost whenever I get one of those offers. I don't do normalization with Israelis, period. I don't care if it will get the poetry to the moon. I don't care if we will get money for endlessly if we do normalization. I think it hurts my people and it hurts our cause if we normalize with Israelis at the current moment and produce art that is supposed to be about us being equals, just getting along, when we are not equals, when we are not getting along, when there is an occupation. Because the entire thing about the normalization projects makes it sound like we are individuals, and on an individual level we can get along if we can just have peace and resolve our issues. We don't have issues with Israelis, we have a brutal military occupation with the Israelis. And I will not sit with somebody who says I don't exist as a human being, and even worse, I don't have a right to return to my homeland, and say that we're going to normalize. And that's always my litmus test. If you can sit opposite me and tell me that I don't have a right to my homeland, then you're telling me I'm beneath you as a human being and we are not equals, so I will not be working with you. And any artist who doesn't believe in my right to return to my homeland shouldn't be seeking to actually collaborate with me. There will be no collaboration. And I think that's a very important point to emphasize, because quite often when people want to mainstream, they get these types of carrots thrown at them. You get the carrot and you get the stick. You get banned from certain places, but you also get to be told that you get funded if you work with Israelis, or you'll get extra money. And we have to be very cautious. And that's why I began by saying we want to mainstream the Palestinian narrative on our terms. And finally, I think we are starting to win, because the facts are speaking for themselves. And I know that sometimes we can feel isolated and we can feel like we are losing the battle, especially in a country like this one where the mainstream media is so against us in every way, shape, and form. But I think the facts on the ground are starting to speak to themselves. And the fact that a video like We Teach Life has over 1 million hits so far is quite remarkable. And I didn't have to compromise on anything to do that. So language, integrity, accountability, and being active, I think, are the cornerstones. Holding on to our politics and our history and our own narrative is how I try to keep organizing. I'm sure I can learn from a lot of you about how we can mainstream more and how we can grow more. But I think the most important way and the most important lesson I always learned from my Palestinian family is that we can always do this together by supporting each other as a community. And that's why it's been wonderful to be with all of you this weekend. Thank you.
Excuse me, excellent, great job. And as you spoke to all of us this morning, one of the things that I play in my mind is life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. So in Rafeef's case, she said, she had not wanted to perform. She wasn't necessarily looking for that microphone, but it was through the anger that came up that you really, I believe, you were guided and destined to do the work that you're doing for us now. So great job. And on the topic of backlash, something that we should all be aware of, I live in a small community in the state of Florida. And it just happened that in legislature you have the Senate president and you have the Speaker of the House. The Speaker pro tem is generally like the vice president of an organization. Generally, you're just the vice president. You may not have to do very much. You're not in the limelight. You're not, speaking in front of and leading. And there happened to be a scandal, and this is back in 2008. So the Speaker pro tem, who's from my city, who's a friend, becomes the Speaker of the House, the most powerful position in the state of Florida legislation. And at that time, the state of Florida, I wasn't following. See, I did not study. I was not a political science major. I was a medicine, pre-med major. And growing up Palestinian, naturally, about the conflict. So I did not necessarily. I also was not asked or felt that that I was very knowledgeable in politics to take the stand, to actually do the work as an activist. But when you see the horrors and the massacres that were happening, I think any good human would feel compelled to speak. And when I visited with him, I wanted to just share with you what he said to me. Because the state of Florida actually voted in solidarity with Israel at the time. And so my question to him is, how can you do that? And he said to me, Manal, hindsight is 20/20. There is a legislator who's a Zionist who basically presented this to us. And for us, it was very much like telling a football team, good job. One football, like USC telling UCLA, good job on a football game. But here's what you need to know and what you can do. He said, first of all, you can speak. You have a nice demeanor to yourself. You're well known. But expect the backlash. Expect the pushback. The other thing that they're doing that you're not doing is they have someone that actually lobbies. When we're in session, there's someone walking in the hall basically selling us propaganda and telling us things. Thirdly, there's a junket. They send us there. They take us there and they tell us what they want to tell us. So I shared this with you kind of just to tie in as the moderator of the session of how in your case, how you were called and guided. Laila is doing it through her blogs and her books. So each and every one of us, and I would love for you to be thinking right now in the audience, what it is that you're already doing, or what it is that you should be doing and can be doing. So don't ever discount anything, because it's going to be the combination of everyone's efforts. It's not going to be one thing that's going to end the occupation. It's going to be all of our cumulative efforts. With that, we actually only have 3 speakers today, not 4. So I'm going to introduce our 3rd speaker, and then we'll open it up for questions. And this gentleman is someone I didn't know about either until this most recent unfortunate attack in Gaza in July and August. And I would see that he had millions of fans, millions of likes. And it wasn't just that, it was the posts, how powerful they were. And I myself also was sharing his posts. So please, I want to introduce to you now our 3rd speaker, Mohamed Zeyara. He has more than 1 million likes on his Facebook page. He is a public figure, educating the public about Palestine. He was born in Canada, raised in Gaza, where many of his family still resides. Unfortunately, Mr. Zeyara has lost some of his family in the most recent attack on Gaza. He is a Muslim youth advisor, filmmaker, and mostly he is known for his online educational and motivational videos. He has completed his pre-medical sciences studies and is currently on his path to finishing his medical degree. So inshallah soon we'll introduce him as Dr. Mohamed Ziyara. Please help me welcome him.
All right, assalamu alaikum. Marhaba al-jamia. First of all, thank you for the beautiful introduction. All right, so the topic of mainstream Palestine is something that I always found extremely difficult to cover. Why is that? It is simply because words can never do justice to the pain inside of our hearts. You know, as Palestinians, no one will understand the struggle. That's just a statement that we will all have to realize. This is a fact. No one will understand what it feels like to live under the occupation of the terrorist group of Israel. No one will understand how it feels like having to go through that Egyptian border. No one is going to understand it. Many times when I come up and I speak about the Egyptian border, I find a lot of people who stand up and try to go against what I'm saying. And my simple reply to that is always, my friend, have you been to the Egyptian border? They say no. I tell them, please go to the Egyptian border, come back to me, and I promise you, you will change what you're saying right now. Because going through it is not like listening to it. I've always had this problem of trying to convey the pain inside of my heart, trying to tell the story of what it feels like going through that border, what it feels like waiting for 2 weeks until the borders open. Okay? However, that doesn't mean we don't try our best. During the recent war on Gaza, genocide, how I started off was, when I started 3 years ago making films and YouTube videos and stuff, my main mission was to come to this point to speak about Palestine, because I lived in Gaza for 10 years. Okay, and I used to see things that would happen, and then go up to turn on the TV and see what's going on in the Western media, and what's the West talking about. Let's not cover that in the news. My friend was just killed, and you're over here talking to me about toys and games and all this stuff. Really? So when these things happen, when you go through that rough time, you come outside to the world. When I left Gaza, I'm like, watch what I'm gonna say. It's going down, right? However, guys, you don't have to walk through hell to become an activist. You don't have to walk through hell to become someone who speaks the truth. Don't wait for that. You just have to have some determination, some humanity inside of your heart to become an activist. And this is a point that I want to cover. When Sister Rafeef was talking about how she was scared to come up on stage and speak. Did that stop her? No, that didn't. And I find a problem or a small flaw that the Muslim society has, or in general, the Arab society has, when it comes to confidence of speaking up, and especially to the Muslim sisters. Now, a lot of people try to put them down. You're a sister, don't speak. Stop talking. You talking is haram or something. These things that you hear. These things shouldn't stop you from going out there and speaking. You can help so much in this society. Girls are so much more dedicated than men. I'm sorry, but we know that's true, right? No, yeah. All the girls are like, finally, right? They're more sincere, they're more dedicated. And they are the ones who are raising this generation. So if our most dedicated and our most sincere individuals are put on a side because of some hateful comments, how is that gonna make us? So please don't let that put you down, and you need to get up and speak up. The way I started was, I started making YouTube videos and films online. And I started sharing some things slowly here and there, until the recent war on Gaza. I had about almost 200,000 followers on Facebook. And I started by watching the IDF's Facebook page. And the things that they were uploading, they frustrated me. I was like, what? I was like, the person who's uploading this knows that this is the biggest lie. They know they're lying. Who are you guys trying to fool? However, they are fooling thousands of people. In fact, millions. How is that? Because of money. As someone who knows Facebook pretty well, the IDF's page spent millions of dollars trying to advertise their pages and their posts, and every single post was boosted with money. I was like, I'm gonna reach to more people without using money, with using my words. And alhamdulillah, thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to your support, during the Gaza war, my page reached to over 50 million people across the world. So what I did was, I already got in trouble coming here and everything, all right? This is part of the backlash. I put my page and compared it with IDF's page and tried to beat their records, and I did, alhamdulillah. And they were using money. However, guys, this is something that is very interesting. When you're using so much money to advertise your propaganda, what does that mean? It means you're not confident. It means you want people to feel bad for you so badly. But that's not how it works, guys. Truth will always prevail. It's always going to come out. People will feel it when you're saying the truth. This is why I didn't have to pay a cent for the page to advertise. This is because I was just saying my words. This is one thing. Another thing when it comes to mainstream Palestine is that we need to speak to the non-Palestinians in a way that they can relate to us. Okay? For example, a common mistake that we see in the Palestinian activists or people when they share posts and so on, they use comments such as, screw Israel, this and that, you pigs, you. That's not going to help, I'm sorry. That's not going to help. That's not going to get you the shares. That's not going to get people, reading your stuff. You need to be logical, factual, with facts, pictures, videos. Okay? These are the things that will influence. These are the things that will go out there to the world. But when you see comments, using ignorant comments and hateful comments, they're not going to go anywhere. In fact, it just gives a bad image about us. When we're fighting, oh, Inta Hamsawi? You're from Hamas? You're from Fatah? Like, don't you know what Fatah did? Don't you know what Hamas did? And we start fighting. No, keep that on the side. For example, when I would upload during the Gaza war, I would upload something. How dare you upload this? And thousands of comments. Yeah, brother, Habibi, yeah, Amri. All right? Wait, we can solve all these things after this whole war is done. We can solve it. I promise you I'm going to fix it. But right now is not the time. So we need to learn how to work together. And that is the next step for us. We need to learn how to take advice from each other. We need to learn how to support each other. Okay? Not because someone got 3 likes, it means they start getting jealous, right? We need to learn how to support each other, put these feelings aside, and focus on one goal only, telling the world how it feels like to be Palestinian. And that task is not easy, my friends. That task is not easy at all. Okay? And I want to speak a little about the backlash. While I was coming here, I was actually interrogated for 20 hours in the airport security. All right? However, I'm not saying, I didn't want to say this, but my lawyer, when I called her, she told me speak about it. Speak about it. Why is that? It's important to speak about it, to tell the world what we have to go through. What we have to go through, they already spoke about it, sisters, just to come up here and tell you the truth. We actually go through a lot. Okay? So when we come up here and we tell you the truth, please support your local activists. Support us. Go out there and tell our stories. You know? Because they were sitting down, you know, and telling me, what do you eat for lunch? You know, like, what I eat for lunch. Okay? Where do you get your money from? Where's your dad? Why were you there? Why were you there? When you went to Gaza, what'd you do? Who'd you meet? I met Auntie. Okay, she cooked me dawali. What do you want me to tell you? All right? So these guys, you will get a serious backlash. People will hate you. But that won't stop you. Okay, you need to take that hate and that pain, okay, and let it fuel, okay, your path towards success. You want to hate on me? All right, I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. Okay? You want to tell me that I can't speak because I'm a girl? I'm going to tell you. I'm going to show you what I can do. All right? You want to tell me that, you know, my English is not so good? I'm going to show you how much I'm going to improve. All right? And also for the parents, please make sure that you support your kids. Encourage them. Don't put them down. Because a simple compliment can make your kid, you know, rise and become a humongous activist. Okay, if your kid comes to you and tells you, you know, I put this on Facebook that I helped this and that, don't tell them this is shumalak ya ahbal. You know? No, you should support them. All right, but next time do this and that. The way I started off, when I came outside from Gaza, okay, I had this whole anger inside of me, man. I'm dealing with all these like PTSDs and I'm angry, right? And whenever I used to put a Facebook post almost 4 years ago, I would just put it with anger. And that didn't go anywhere. However, when my friends came to me and they're like, all right, Mohamed, I think we need to do this and that and that. That is when we reach to millions of people. All right? So make sure you learn how to take advice from others. Make sure how to learn how to like take that advice and try to implement that. And we need to learn how to give advice and when to give advice. Okay, so please remember that. And I feel like that these couple of points should suffice. And I hope you guys learned something. Thank you a lot for listening, and I hope to see you later.
Thank you, Mohamed. And I'm really impressed by all our speakers. They stayed within time. And what I wanted to share with you is a term that I used when I did my workshop yesterday. A few of you were in the room, so you will remember this. If you're not doing it, I recommend that you start to do this because you can actually start to think of new ways. And the term is cross-pollinate. So I would call myself a cross-pollinator, meaning when I attend a conference on a completely different topic, it might be a business, it might be leadership, I'm always listening and learning from these speakers and thinking, what is it that I can apply? Is there something that I can take this idea and help in our cause regarding Palestine? The other thing that we spoke about, and I know one of our speakers has another session, and we have about 5 minutes left. I want to give you a chance to ask questions. And for any of you who would like to address is on normalization. What I'm being told is that there are Jewish people that are trying to also work to help us liberate Palestine and Palestine. And sometimes you get caught in, you know, am I working with someone? And that what they have said to me is if we're trying to change the condition, it is not normalization. We're trying to help you break through that. So would any of you like to comment on working with the Jewish community in terms of liberating Palestine? Okay, Rafeef would like to answer.
Since I spoke about normalization, I think it's completely two different things to be able to work within the anti-Zionist Jewish community that supports us. I think there are brave individuals. I work within the Boycotts, Divestments and Sanctions movement, and within that there's the group Boycott from Within, and I work with them regularly. I go out to demonstrations with people who are anti-Zionist Jews constantly. But there's a difference, and within the BDS movement, we always say there's a difference between normalization and what they call coexistence versus co-resistance. So we can definitely work with people who want to resist with us and respect our rights as Palestinians. And our basic rights are our right to return and an end to the occupation and equality for Palestinian citizens of Israel. As long as they can respect these rights and treat us as equals, then of course we can work together. But how can you work with someone who's not respecting you as a human being and not respecting your equal rights? So the movement is all welcome to anti-Zionist Jews who understand that Zionism is a form of racism and that the state of Israel is a settler colonial state. And this conference has actually been full of wonderful anti-Zionist Jews who support us. But I think that's a good concept to keep in mind, co-resistance versus coexistence. And we will co-resist with everyone who respects our rights to return to our homes and lands.
Okay, I'd like to open it up for questions. Is there anyone that would like to ask a question? We just have a few minutes left. There's a microphone, or if you can raise your voice, or there's a microphone.
Okay. Should I go there? Yeah.
Oh, there's one on the side also. Okay.
I would like Dr. Ziadeh to recite the poem We Teach Life. Is it possible?
Is it possible for you to recite your poem, We Teach Life? No? Shorter version? You have a shorter version? You can't. She has another session to go to.
But tonight.
Tonight she'll be doing it. Well, she'll do it tonight, she said. Okay, question, huh? Alaikum salam. Sister Laila, do you have your books here?
Yes, well, I'll be doing a book signing later. I can find out the exact time for you, I'm not sure.
Okay, any more questions? We have one more? No more? I thought I saw somebody going towards the microphone. Well, with that, inshallah, next year, we'll be here to celebrate the rebuilding of Palestine. Because not only do we need to end the occupation, nearly 6 decades, it's a lot of time to live under oppression, and there's a lot of work that we all need to do. So inshallah, enjoy your day and learn a lot and do the best that you can, and we'll see you next time. Assalamu alaikum.